All right, that brings us to TNA. Just TNA from now on. I will no longer call it NWA-TNA because this is the month where we did have the debut of the Barry Scott Stinger on the September 8th show with the TNA wrestling, with the new face of professional wrestling. Or this is TNA, the new face of professional wrestling to be precise. So that's I think the formal point at which we separate NWA-TNA from TNA. So this is just TNA now, Liam.
And it feels it too.
It does, and like that's the first big thing this month is that it is the end of the Asylum days. That September 8th show, the date with fate on September 8th, is the final Nashville show, the final weekly pay-per-view, the final show TNA will hold in the Asylum televised until 2019. So we'll be waiting a while to get back to that building, and I'm quite pleased, to be honest.
You know what? I'm disappointed.
All right, please eulogize the weekly pay-per-views for me, Liam.
Bad.
Mm?
Not fun.
Mm-hmm.
Look like shit.
Mm-hmm.
Bad wrestling.
Right.
Bad angles.
Of course.
Bad booking.
A given.
I hate it.
Why are you disappointed?
That it didn't die quicker.
Oh, those poor Nashville shows. Like, when you look at this is the end of the first phase of TNA history, the first, block, that Asylum era. And I think the biggest disappointment is that it would be worth it if you could say it just took them that time to work out their identity. But as they come out of those Nashville shows, it's like they couldn't have less of an identity.
As soon as the Nashville shows ended, it instantly felt like a better product. Because it felt like, and we talked about it a couple episodes ago, what this company needs is a focus point to aim everything towards. And almost immediately, you saw that start to come to fruition with Victory Road, right? Like, you were already starting to build matches, and they had a clear point where the matches were going to fucking conclude at, and it just feels like this is how wrestling is supposed to be booked.
Yeah, and the idea of weekly pay-per-views, it's a bad idea in the first place. But when you look at the execution of it, in that they just booked it like an endless series of television. Like, the odd time they did build toward big shows, there was Jarrett Raven. Even this month, they did build toward the date with Fate. That was they spent 6 weeks or so building toward that show. Not particularly well, but they did build toward it.
They did. You know what? They still a better build to that match than to the supposed NWA title match at Victory Road.
Well, to be fair, they do have 9 weeks of television between the final pay-per-view and the first Victory Road match, or between Victory Roads. So we watched 3 weeks of that, which is very much the preliminary, and one of them doesn't count, basically. Yeah. Which we will talk about why when we get into the news about why one of those shows didn't count, basically.
And one of them had the best match of the entire month on it.
Yes, which was the one that didn't count. The way they booked those shows, the way they put together and structured their week to week of it, where it was never we're giving you 2 hours worth of wrestling for value for money. It's just we're just doing TV on pay-per-view, and it kind of stunk.
Don't say kinda, it did stink.
No, there was periods where it didn't.
Yeah, okay, sorry, the 10% of the entire history of the company where it was kind of okay.
No, I think all of 02 and 03 up to October are even when not good, they were interesting. It's a new company, they're trying things.
I'm talking about actual good, which was a handful of months.
I don't care for actual good. I just want to at least be entertained in some capacity.
Okay.
Whereas the second we ticked over into that Jarrett and Dutch regime, it's this is just fucking terrible. It's terrible.
Worse than terrible, it's boring.
They just produced the most nothing happening bad wrestling, and it got worse, and then we're just at the point in September where it's bad. But, they threw all those ideas at the wall in 03, and some of them should have stuck. None of them did stick. Then they switched to a regime that had literally no ideas that we've had to put up with for pretty much a year now. and they're just not good. They don't have an identity. It's like they didn't spend 2 years throwing stuff at the wall to find out that, like, that's it. You know, that's the thing that works for us. They spent 2 years throwing stuff at a wall and then decided to do absolutely nothing for a year. God, 04 is bad.
And to be honest, coming out of it, I don't even really know what this company's they're going for.
Yeah, like there's an increased focus on the X division a little bit, but not as much as to be like, that's our thing. But it is more of a thing than it was, say, in 03 as like a key cornerstone of the company. And like there is some Asylum success stories. There's AMW. There's some of Raven, but not all of Raven. The more recent Raven stuff, a tad spotty, and he's basically not on television this month. The only thing he does is stand in the background of the Jared Hardy match. That's all the Raven you get in September.
Yeah, I guess I'm assuming he's hurt or something.
No, he's on the outs for reasons that we will get into in a moment.
Ooh, drama. That's why we're here, really.
Yeah, it's a weird time. I think 03 is the year you should probably watch out of it, because it's the period with the most good stuff and the most wacky stuff, as opposed to 02, which is like finding their feet, and 04, which is boring as shit.
I think you can make a solid, like, top 10 compilation match list from these first 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it.
And then you could put every match past that top 10 is like a 2.5 to 3 star match that you'll never forget.
That's why you don't
again.
go past the top 10. There's no disc 2.
Yeah, there is like a series of memorable moments. There's like the head.
Oh yeah, you'd have like a cool little compilation video as the extras of all the angles, of all the wackiest angles. But like, yeah, I don't know. It's not exactly quality TV.
It's probably the period at which the most like old and fun wrestlers showed up, even if, like, you know, Kurt Hennig or Mike Awesome didn't do anything particularly notable. We did have that kick-ass Mike Barton Perry Saturn match. Remember that? That ruled.
Mm-hmm. Kenzo Suzuki.
Yeah, Kenzo Suzuki, Takawa Mori. Remember Takawa Mori?
Yeah. The Briscoes.
Oh, yeah, getting chokeslammed by Malice and having the big noise in the middle of the ring.
Awesome.
It is like the wackiest period in TNA history for just guys showing up, which was a lot of fun.
I think that's the thing too. I do have a fondness for like that first 6 months or whatever when it was just stupid. The problem is most of it just devolved into boring.
When you had Puppet and you had the Dups and you had Bruce and you had all of that
Bruce,
stuff.
surprisingly great worker. That's one of the biggest surprises of the NWA-TNA.
It all went downhill when Brian Lawler stopped showing up.
It's true. Man, I haven't thought about Brian Lawler in forever, and it makes me sad now.
And yeah, I'm shocked he never, ever, ever came back. Not even for a one-off.
29 months later.
So that is the Asylum days. A failed experiment in so many, many, many regards. But it kept the doors open. So that's about all it needed to do.
But here we are now. Now this is like functionally, visually, everything. This is TNA now. I was watching the Petey Williams squash on one of the last Impacts, and I was watching it, and it was bright, and they had I guess they had new cameras. It all was so bright, and the reds were popping, and the crowd looked good, and he was doing a Canadian Destroyer, and I'm like, TNA.
This is TNA. Barry Scott is right with that. By the way, the first time you hear Barry Scott's voice in TNA history is that September 8th, sir, with the debut of the This is TNA stinger. That's
quite poetic.
Yeah, you hear the iconic voice of Barry Scott for the first time there, and it is increasingly, you realize, I think the TNA that people know and love as an identity is basically created by Dave Sahadi.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that thing that you can associate with, right? It's like, it's that thing that you kind of snap back to. It's like, I guess similar reactions would be to like different Raw and SmackDown intros over the years.
Because yeah, you get a lot of those like production elements, like the Barry Scott voiceover, but just the general vibe. All those promos start positioning the company as like the actual true, honest to goodness alternative to WWE. Whether it is or not at this stage is an open question, but like they are positioning the company as something, and that's David Sahadi. whose work people rave about this month, and you see bits and pieces of it like seeping into the show. There's a lot more video features on the impacts later in the month, especially the ones building to Victory Road that are like, oh, these are just worlds above JB's effort and Moody Jack, but they like stitch into this show together in Premiere, and this is like stuff that has actual like vision to it.
It does feel like immediately after the pay-per-views, and like I it's interesting that they did it this way because I don't think they necessarily had like a reason to, but it did feel like an extended reboot, and they framed these post NWA-TNA pay-per-view impacts like as if they were presenting it to a brand new audience again, which is like interesting because they're not. It's the same people watching. It's not like they've got on a new channel or something and people are flipping it over and catching it for the first time. But it's interesting that they went with that decision because I think as viewers and people who have seen every show up until this point, it is really refreshing to get that new coat of paint on it.
And it's right, like it's the second time this year they've done that. Like they did that kind of reboot heading into the launch of Impact, where it's like, all right, we have a bunch of people watching for the first time. We need to, set our champions back to Styles, AMW, and Jarrett, their default positions. Reintroduce TNA via Impact, and yeah, you're right in that. Like the first Impact after the pay-per-views end, the September 10th Impact, ends with like Mike Tenay is like, oh, we have this great video package that will introduce TNA to you, and it is a pretty good video package, and it ends with the 30-second spot for Victory Road, which is a real good spot too. It's not a reboot. Like they're still telling all the same stories they were telling the 2 days before on the pay-per-view. It's not like they've dumped all those stories. A lot of those stories continue through to Victory Road on November 7th, but it does feel like it's like, all right, we kind of need to reset here because what we're doing isn't working.
The main event like story is a story designed to introduce you to all the main eventers. Like, who's going to be the number one contender? Well, let's have a bunch of squash matches with our top talent so you can see them as they are all fighting to be number one contender. But this is also a great excuse to show everyone who these people are and run vignettes on the people who aren't on the shows.
Yeah, and they move into a little mini tournament in September to crown a number one contender, or in November even, or October. What's the month after September, Liam? It's October. Spook month,
October.
the one we're in. I think part of that is actually there was indecision about who should be main event Victory Road. Like the original plan was to do a 2 pay-per-view program with Monty, which they lost their bottle on. So now they're like, what do we do if it's not Monty?
I have no clue.
Well, you will find out when watching in October, but this is September, and we will talk about it in depth.